Welcome back to Nineworks TV. We have got a cracking episode for you today, studying Porsche's first indomitable, all-conquering super sports car from the water-cooled generation. It is, of course, the 996 Turbo. The 996 Turbo was a game changer for Porsche in many ways. You have to look at its predecessor with the 993 Turbo, which started to kind of redefine what we think of the 911 Turbo. Moving on from the early air-cooled days of Widowmakers, the 993 Turbo, however, that kind of changed everything. It went twin turbocharged, reducing the lag, four-wheel drive for more grip as well. The multi-link rear axle made the car far more comfortable. The 996 Turbo, as I mentioned in previous videos, well, that really was an extension of that, and as I say, really started to mould what we now know and we now think of the 911 Turbo today. That all-purpose, all-conquering, indomitable super sports car. Four-wheel drive, twin turbocharged, just like the 993 Turbo, but the 996 Turbo added Tiptronic, not to mention a cabriolet version as well. So as I say, this is really kind of redefining what we now know and think of as the 911 Turbo today. The difference, of course, with the 996 Turbo is today, this car is outstanding value for money. It really does have power and torque figures to rival modern day machinery, but all in a package that really starts at £40,000. It really is a technological tour de force, and in today's video we're going to look through all of the tech that this car is laden with. We're also going to offer a little bit of a buyer's guide as well for certain things to look for. We're going to get specialist input on that and just assess what is an absolutely awesome Porsche 996. Right, tech on this car. We'll start at the front because, of course, in being the turbo, and as I've just mentioned, the 996 Turbo is all-wheel drive. It actually takes the four-wheel drive system from the 996 Carrera 4, which is essentially viscous coupling and a front diff. There's no electronic input on the diff at the front, by the way. It's all mechanical. So that varies torque between the two axles. It's never exclusively rear-wheel drive, although it is predominantly. The minimum amount of torque that's sent over the front axle is 5%. The maximum is 40, so it's variable between that. It is, of course, wide-bodied. It's got new front fenders, new headlights. So this was the first car that really brought along the 996 facelift, moving away, of course, for what was in some circles the derided fried egg headlights. Incidentally, we've got a different bumper profile that was copied, I suppose, for the 996 C4S. The difference being on the Turbo that it's got three radiators at the front, and as I mentioned, this being wide body, coming to the back of the car, the 996 Turbo is 60mm wider than the narrow body Carreras. We'll jump back to the front. We've got the turbo twist wheels. The difference between the turbo wheels and the C4S wheels is the spokes on here are hollow. Okay, so these are lighter than the C4S wheels that look similar to it. So we've got hollow spoked 18-inch Turbo 2 wheels, housing big red brakes. The discs are 330mm up front, so that's up from 318 on the Carreras. Coming backwards, one of the big design hallmarks on the Turbo is side air intakes, and this is because the 996 was a big reworking over the 993 before it. This represented the switch from air to water cooling, and it also meant for the first time, as whereas the 993 Turbo, those twin intercoolers were sitting on top of the engine, for the 996 they moved to the side, and that's where this, what is now iconic design hallmark of the side air intake, this is where it comes into it. So the air comes through the side here and hits the intercoolers. The Turbo changed its aerodynamics, or its approach to aerodynamics. This is a hydraulically actuated biplaned rear wing. It's something that the Turbo has utilised right up to the present day. The engine itself, so it's flat six, 3.6 litres, dry sumped Metzger engine, okay? You can tell, for those that don't know, is looking inside, it's got that additional oil tank, and it has a load of scavenge pumps. So it's dry sumped Metzger engine. It has Le Mans winning pedigree because this engine is derived from the GT1 98 car, finished first overall at Circuit de la Sarthe. 420 horsepower, twin K16 turbochargers, one for each bank, and we've got 560 Newton meters. And again, like, you need to put that into context. By modern day, that is still incredibly quick. We forget this is 2 decades old. It's an incredible piece of engineering. The engine is M96/70 is the code. Now, it's a totally different flat six to the one that's found in my Carrera, for example. Their wet sumps, totally different. This does away with a load of the foibles on the Carrera's M96 engine. For example, dodgy IMS bearings and oil starvation. None of that exists on this. The big thing that I just really need to point out, and is part of the charm of this car, it's got so much awesome tech shoehorned into this 911 silhouette, and yet is outstanding value for money compared to even modern day Porsche machinery. You really are getting 80% of modern Porsche machinery here for, well, as I say, nowhere near the sum that you'll pay for a 992 Turbo S or a 992 Turbo straight off a forecourt at a Porsche dealer. I'm very excited to drive this car. It's been a while since I've driven a 996 Turbo, so I'm looking forward to getting reacquainted with it. We better hit the road. I mentioned the spec of the car. Well, it proved mightily popular at the time because over, well, 5 model years of production, there were 17,500 996 Turbo coupes made for worldwide markets and another 3,500 cabriolets. So again, that really does underline the popularity of this car. It's worth touching on the cabriolet just to say that that came out 1 model year later in 2001. That was the first cabriolet in terms of Porsche where the roof could be retracted or put up at speeds of up to 30 miles an hour. It was the first time the car didn't have to be stationary. Inside the 996 Turbo, well, it's not really changed too much at face value over its Carrera siblings. There's extra smatterings of leather. Of course, the clocks are slightly different because it doesn't rev round to 7,200 like the Carrera range. It does mean, in terms of interior quality and haptics, the car's predecessors and successors, I would argue, are superior in that department. Worth pointing out, actually, the clutch on this is so light. A couple of weeks ago I did a test drive of a 996 GT2. There was no assistance to the clutch pedal at all. It was very, very heavy. The GT2, of course, being based on the 996 Turbo. Totally different here. I mean, it's really light, actually, really kind of simple, easy to use. And that kind of feeds into what the 911 Turbo in 996 form is all about. And as I mentioned earlier, that mantra of everyday usability and all-round performance, comfort, luxury, style, everything that kind of gets wrapped up in that Turbo name these days, all starts here with this. It's a really fast car, even by today's standards. It's still pleasingly quick, but it's also really comfortable as well. I feel like I could drive right now to the Porsche Museum at Stuttgart and it'd be a breeze, just testament to the usability of this car. Here we go, National. Christ. Yeah, so look, just after 2,000 RPM, you can really feel those K16 turbochargers waking up, thrusting you up the road with 0.8 maximum bar of boost pressure, putting down that maximum horsepower of 420, and the ability, therefore, for this car to cover quite a lot of ground quite quickly is very apparent. It's not just about power delivery in the first water-cooled turbo, but the 560 Newton meters of peak torque on offer too. It's actually over quite a healthy power band. It's from 2,700 RPM up to 4,400 RPM. So again, that power band is super wide for you to really kind of get the most out of this car and just the brute power that, well, what it's known for, really. The other good thing about the 996 Turbo, and it's what it does with that 420 horsepower, and the power is also sent, as I said earlier in the video, to all 4 wheels. And it just means that the 996 Turbo is not lacking in traction at all. You put your foot down and you can feel that turbo boost come in pretty soon after 2 grand, building to maximum power at 2007, carrying you right the way around to 4.5. So it's got a really strong mid-range here. Again, that was kind of the Achilles heel of the classic turbos, whereby the power was very on-off. There was a lot of lag and then it would kick in. That is mitigated with the twin turbocharger setup on the 911 Turbo, of course it is, but again, in kind of putting power to all 4 wheels, it absolutely aids the traction of the car. I think in terms of criticisms, compared to other 911 Turbos, It's not quite as visually imposing as its predecessors or indeed successors. I just feel like the 997 Turbo just has a little bit more kind of something about it in terms of road presence. What I will say is, and this is what works in the 996's favour, is despite it being wide body and everything else, it still feels small enough to feel like a genuine sports car rather than like a GT. And actually that makes it much more pleasing to pedal on a British B road than say a 991 Turbo or definitely a 992 Turbo. It's very, very easy to place this car on the road. This being a turbo, I do feel it appropriate to give it a little bit of stick and find out what 0.8 bar of boost and 420 horsepower feels like. So dual carriageway is the only place to do that in the UK. So here we go, second gear. Oof. Wowzers. Yeah, I mean, it's still a rocket ship, isn't it? I think the 911 Turbo of today, certainly in Turbo S fashion, is 650 horsepower, 700 odd newton meters of torque. This still feels incredibly fast. I need to kind of quantify that and really underline it. It's incredible, really, that a car that is 2 decades old, most cars of this vintage were cubed a long, long time ago, but this is still going and it still delights and it still delivers an almighty whack of inertia that puts a smile on your face and underlines the fact that this is still a very quick and very capable machine. It is incredible that a car like this, with the technology it has, can be had for less than 50k. The other thing to note actually is how well this car rides. It's perfectly compliant, it's not crashy, the steering on the turbo is lovely, there's a really nice amount of feedback. The big red brakes as well, they do an absolutely fantastic job of stopping this car. Oof. Bit of a brake, put the nose in. Oh yeah, look, this is lovely. Proper job. This feels like a classic 911 to drive. You still have to brake to get a bit of weight over the front of the nose there. I mentioned the front axle of the 996 Turbo. I mean, it's not exactly a criticism of the car per se. I'm just saying that the 997 Turbo's nose is definitely a bit of a step on, just in terms of feel and sharpness, directness really. It just feels a little bit more dialed in over the 996. But I think it's fair to say a criticism that has often been levied at the 996 Turbo is its sound, and there are a lot of 996 Turbo owners that have gone down the route of aftermarket exhaust to really unlock the sound of this car. I mean, 911 Turbos have always been quiet, right up to the modern day cars. These aren't as quiet as everybody says or makes out. Of course, there's a different sound to a turbo than there is over Carrera. There's a lot more induction noise for a start. It's not quiet per se. And again, I mentioned the analogy of jumping in this car and driving across Europe. Well, I kind of feel like it's a good mix of being loud when you want it to be, but also not being overbearing. And again, just feeds into the idea of this being a car for every occasion. I'm really impressed. I'm really enjoying this car. We've covered the spec, we've covered my driving impressions from behind the wheel. Let's now get the views of a specialist that can tell you what to look for when it comes to buying a 996 Turbo.
It's such a cool car. Its value has sort of, gone down in the quiet years when they were sort of out of focus. Prices, went down to £30,000 as they were not the flavour of the month, and they were tarnished with some of the stuff that the 996 were all beaten with for a long time. And then people's views started to change. Sometimes they can feel a bit lethargic and a bit wallowy and a bit baggy and all that sort of stuff.
Why is that then?
They're getting on. And, suspension and stuff, it's taking a bit of a beating over, those years. And, unless those things are uprated or, changed, then, that's when the cars start to feel a bit sad and a bit baggy. And then they're an entirely different beast, I think when they're on their toes, I think they're just a fantastic car. Then there's, the drivetrain, how's the clutch and flywheel and all that sort of stuff. It's taking, assuming it's a manual car, it's taking a lot of torque, and if it's not driven with sympathy, then, you're going to wear out those things and they're a few quid to change. Yeah. They are very, very, very strong if they're maintained correctly. You want to see a proper maintenance record now. You want to buy from someone that can produce, a decent amount of backstory for that car. No huge gaps of long periods. I was talking about, suspension componentry. Some lower arms and stuff have been done, not all that long ago. And those boring bits I keep going on about AC condensers, radiators, and all those things have been changed and that sort of stuff. Because, each of these jobs is broadly £1,000. It's just another thousand, and so you could buy something which looks quite shiny, but really is £10,000 behind a car that is, the real deal.
So one of the best value semi-modern supercars you can buy, absolutely. Of that there is no question. But I think there's a wider point to be made with the 996 Turbo, possibly one that's not been discussed before. You're kind of buying two cars in one with a 996 Turbo. The reason is, around town, it's a nice, capable, comfortable, docile machine. It will get you to where you want to go in relative comfort and luxury. But then, step on the gas, and this whole new world of performance is unlocked just like that. And it's not so Jekyll and Hyde and on and off, and therefore as unpredictable as turbo predecessors such as the 930 or 964. The twin turbochargers and the four-wheel drive add some sophistication into the mix. It's pleasant, it's pleasing, it's not diluted in any real way, or not to the point that it puts you off driving it. It's still very, very capable of surprising you and putting a smile on your face without trying to kill you, basically. So that's where I view the Turbo sitting today. Absolutely the best value for money semi-modern supercar out there. The duality to that 996 Turbo means that you really do feel like you're getting two sports cars or two cars in one here. Definitely a car that still feels fast and accomplished by today's standards, but also a car that proportionally and in terms of its layout still kind of holds on or retains that classic 911 feel. Timeless piece of Porsche engineering. Here's 3 words to finish on the 996 Turbo. A performance bargain.